Hello everyone, No One of Consequence here, back again with a new video. So Rob Kuntz released a statement late last week. I've seen several videos about this topic since then, so I decided to have a go at it as well. Now, it's taken me longer than other YouTubers to make a video about this because I wanted to do some research first. Then I had to put it all together so I could try to present it in a logical and coherent manner. A rant video is fine and all, but I want to be able to back up my positions with facts and examples. So first of all, who is Rob Kuntz? Now, of course, many D&D players, especially the older ones, will already know. But some players, especially younger people, may not know who he is or why we should care about what he has to say. So here is his Wikipedia entry, and just there at the top you can see that he's best known for his various contributions to Dungeons & Dragons related materials. You can read the whole article if you want to go there and do that. Just a little bit more from Wikipedia. They're highlighted at the top. You can see that Kuntz played in the second ever game session that Gygax ran that was set in his world of Greyhawk, and Kuntz had a character named Robilar. And then even just a year later, in 1973, Kuntz was dungeon mastering for Gygax himself. Then, going forward a couple of years, in 1975, Rob Kuntz was one of the first batch of employees that was hired to work at TSR. So as you can see, Rob Kuntz was involved with Dungeons & Dragons almost from the beginning. So now that we've established his bona fides, let's take a look at what he wrote last week. Here it is, and I am not going to read the entire statement out loud. Chances are you've already seen it elsewhere. But if not, you can pause the video and read it here, and I'll give you a moment in case you need to do so. Alright, so obviously this man is very angry, but the question is why? Well, first some background. To mark the 50th anniversary of Dungeons & Dragons, WotC announced plans to publish this book, The Making of Original Dungeons & Dragons from 1970 to 77. It was to include handwritten notes, typewritten manuscripts, and basically everything up to and including the earliest version of the Dungeons & Dragons game. So to advertise the book, WotC released a video about it on their YouTube channel earlier this year, and this is the thumbnail for that video. And this is Jason Tondro, who was in charge of the entire book project. Towards the end of that video I just mentioned, he says this.
Take a step back here. Let's clarify. There are materials in original Dungeons & Dragons that would never pass our inclusivity reviews today. And a lot of it is, some of it you can understand. Like, okay, these are a bunch of war gamers, and they're using armies from history. And so when they create a warrior class for Dungeons & Dragons, they call it the fighting man, right? Because that's what they were used to. And they were all men. They were all white dudes from Lake Geneva and the Twin Cities. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's a lot of material in this book, and I won't go over all of it, but it would not pass our inclusivity reviews today.
Alright, so just as an aside, what does the fact that the founders of Dungeons & Dragons were white have to do with anything? I'm just asking. But anyway, for context, this is the real book and this specific passage that Tondro is referring to. This book was published in 1974, and you can see the whole fighting man thing that he's referring to. So, what Tondro says is accurate, but I don't believe that any harm was intended, and even Tondro excuses the creators on this, although in sort of a backhanded way. But the point is, the term man or mankind was frequently used in those days, but it was meant to imply everyone. I mean, even Neil Armstrong said it when he first stepped onto the moon a few years earlier in 1969.
I'm going to step off the limb. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So at any rate, when did TSR address this oversight regarding fighting men? Well, the answer seems to be only 2 years later, in 1976. This is an article which appeared in Dragon Magazine number 3, which was published in October of that year. If you want to, you can pause the video a moment if you want to read the text in detail here. Or you can easily find this magazine online and download it and read the entire article for yourself. Now, it's true that in this article there are differences given between males and females, most notably in the area of strength. But before you condemn the game creators for that, just remember that even today, the United States military has different standards of physical fitness for both males and females. I myself was in the Army for over 30 years, so I'm quite familiar with this topic. So the date when this magazine was published, which was, again, 1976, falls within the scope of that D&D history book. So was the addressing of the oversight regarding females discussed in that book? I mean, I don't know, I don't have a copy. But maybe someone who does own the book can comment on that question. So moving on with that video, next we get this.
Well, we couldn't change it. It's history. What we can do is acknowledge it and show how far we've come. Because that's not D&D anymore.
Yeah.
Right? D&D gets more diverse and has a larger audience every day. The more diverse the game becomes, the more people of different genders and ethnic backgrounds and faiths see themselves in the game. Then they go make their own versions of the game, and more players start to see themselves represented in the game.
All right, so my first reaction upon listening to all that is this.
What in God's holy name are you blathering about?
However, I will try to address what Tondra was saying in that clip, just based upon my own personal experiences. So first I want to provide some background on my early days of playing Dungeons & Dragons, as I title here, How We Played Back in the Day. So first of all, we did not play a long-term, consistent campaign, not like what you are seeing here on my channel, if you've been following that. A single group of players with the same characters in a years-long campaign. That's not how we played back then. Everyone had a stable of player characters, which varied in class and levels. Playing the game consisted of one-shot adventure modules, which would be completed in one or more game sessions. So how it usually went was someone in our gaming group would purchase a new adventure module from TSR, and then they would either offer to run it themselves or let someone else run it for whoever wanted to play. And those who did want to play would select an appropriate character from their stable, as I call it, and then we would play through the adventure. But back to that video clip, first I want to talk about this assumption that people want to, quote, see themselves in the game. Personally, I think it's mostly nonsense. I believe that most people play D&D precisely so they can be something that they are not in real life. Now here are some examples that I was able to recall from my early days with the game, which would be from late 1979 up through the early 80s. And again, this is why it took me a while to create this video, because I I wanted to have plenty of time to think about it and try to recall things. So first of all, I'm not going to give any names, just to protect privacy. You just have to trust me on this. But this first entry that I'm referencing is a person who actually introduced me to the Dungeons & Dragons game. And one of the characters in his so-called stable was a female thief, which he sometimes brought out and played. So clearly that's not him seeing himself in the game. So here's another person who actually DM'd the first D&D game I ever played in, and he, for that matter, he also killed off my first character. Now, as I say here, he was gay. He was not openly out at that time. That wouldn't happen until a few years later. Keep in mind, this is around, say, 1980. We were in high school, so you can understand his decision. But we knew about it, and we didn't care. All we really cared about was that he was part of our gaming group. The point is, his in-game, his sexuality and that of his characters never even came up. And, for that matter, it really didn't come up with anyone. Alright, so here's another person I played D&D with back in the early days. Unfortunately, he has since passed away. Now, this person was heavy. I mean, he was very heavy. He was large. But I mean, again, we accepted him. He was one of our gaming group. So what type of character did he always play? Well, he always played big, muscle-bound fighters. And if his beginning stats were good enough, he would make it a paladin. Now, I once ran a one-shot in which this person participated. This was a person who was in the same high school where I was at. He was blind, Japanese American. That's a hard row to hoe, as they say, being in that situation. But I was friends with him, and several of my friends were friends with him. And so one time we invited him to play Dungeons and Dragons with us, and he accepted. So, who did he want to play? Well, he wanted to be Gandalf. That was his favorite character from the books, and he wanted to be Gandalf. He saw himself as Gandalf when we played. Just as a note, he loved the miniatures that we used because of their tactile nature. And I even let him keep the miniature I loaned him to use to represent his character when we played the game. Alright, so when we move forward several years, when I was playing with different people while attending college. So one of the people that I played D&D with here was a black male. So what character class did this person always want to play? Well, he had the book Oriel Adventures, and his favorite character class was called a Wu-Zhen, which is a type of Far Eastern magic user. Now, thinking about this, I just want to, again, as an aside, would this be considered cultural appropriation? I'm just asking. Alright, this female player, this was actually my girlfriend at the time, back during the 90s. For this particular game, I was DMing the Temple of Elemental Evil for a group. She was one of the players, and what did she elect to play? A male cleric and a male magic user, both named after biblical figures. I don't remember the magic user's name just off the top of my head, but I do remember that the cleric was named Gideon. At any rate, I actually still have their character sheets put away. So then there was another female player that was in a one-shot I participated in back during the early 90s. It was arranged on a local bulletin board system. Back then there was no internet per se, but computers did have modems, and there were local bulletin boards that you could dial into. And a lot of these bulletin boards were game-oriented, and sometimes we would use them to coordinate in-person games. So again, there was one game that I participated in, and there was a female player, And she played, it was called the Hori class, which appeared in White Dwarf magazine number 13. Now this class was a magic user who specialized in charm-type spells and was also a seductress. And again, this was White Dwarf number 13, which was published for June-July of 1979. This magazine can also be found online if you're truly interested in looking into that. And then finally, myself. I once ran what would now be called, I think, a neurodiverse character. Now, this was not a joke character, and I did not run him as such. The thing is, my brother was running a series of adventures, and I didn't have a character that was really suitable for the party, so I took a pre-gen from that was offered, and it was a magic user, as I say, but he had a very low constitution score. So I thought about, well, how can I incorporate that into the gameplay? And part of that, the way it manifested itself, he had a very weak stomach. He was limited on what he could eat, but he was also prone to panic attacks. And it ended up being a lot of fun. And I'm still in contact with some of the people who participated in those games, and if I mention it, they'd probably remember this character. He was very memorable. And I still have his character sheet too. So this entire list also serves as my personal experience that even in the early days of Dungeons & Dragons, the game and the people who played it were already inclusive and welcoming of anyone who wished to play. And also, all character types were embraced even back then. Just to elaborate on that, when I was in college, I would sometimes run an open table game in the dormitory lounge, and anyone who was interested in learning the game was invited to join in. And, being a college dorm, you could expect there was a whole range of different people, but I never turned anyone away who was interested in learning. And then also there was a point in time when I was in the army stationed in Germany, and again, I sometimes ran an open game in the barracks, and again, everyone who was interested was welcome. And the military especially is truly a cross-section of society, as anyone who has served can tell you. But anyway, this is all just my personal experiences. But I do believe that it is representative of early D&D as a game and the people who played it back then. So all of this brings us to the book itself. It was released in late June of this year. So here we have Jason Tondro again, writing in the book's preface. And this is just a section I clipped. And I don't know, somebody who got a copy of the book was uploading photos of these pages. I don't know who it was or where, but I got the images and clipped out the parts that I wanted. So anyway, I appreciate whoever it was that did that. But anyway, here he says, some people have charitably ascribed this language to authors working from bad assumptions. In the 1970s, historical war gamers in America were predominantly white middle-class men. Again, I ask, what does their race and socioeconomic status have to do with anything? But anyway, he says, it isn't surprising that they would dub a class of soldiers the fighting man. But when, in the pages of Greyhawk, the description of the Queen of Chaotic Dragons includes a dig at women's lib, the misogyny is revealed as a conscious choice. It's an unfortunate fact that women seldom appear in original D&D, and when they do, they're usually portrayed disrespectfully. So, first I want to just briefly address, again, the part about women first, since we already covered that earlier in this video. And also, just as an aside, you can see that he starts to mention slavery, but that's going to have to wait and be a topic of a separate video. So anyway, again, I already showed this slide, but you can see here, the point is that the creators address that whole thing about fighting men only 2 years after the game's creation in this article in 1976. So back to that same paragraph in the preface, I want to go back to that line where he says, in the pages of Greyhawk, the description of the Queen of Chaotic Dragons includes a dig at women's lib. The misogyny is revealed as a conscious choice. Alright, so just for context, this is the rule book and the specific text entry that Tondro is referring to. Now, note that Rob Kuntz is the co-author of this rule book. But just like he says in that preface, here's the entry, and you can see the very last line there about women's lib. May make whatever they wish from the foregoing. Personally, I believe that Gygax, assuming that he wrote this particular passage, was simply making a clumsy attempt at a joke. Anyway, moving on. Here's another section from the preface. The cultural appropriation of original D&D ranges from the bewildering, like naming every 6th level cleric a llama. Okay, this is a fair criticism. I never liked the whole llama thing myself either, and actually, to be honest, we never even really use any of those class level titles. But he continues, he says, gods, demigods, and heroes, not reprinted in this book, includes game statistics for sacred figures revered by more than 1 billion people around the world. Were players expected to fight Vishnu, one of the principal deities of Hinduism, kill him, and loot his +3 sword of demon slaying? Well, to answer his question, all you have to do is read the book in question. So for context, here is the rule book and the specific text entry that Tondro is referring to. And again, note that Rob Kuntz is co-author of this rule book. And in the final sentence of the entry, you can even see the magic sword that Tondro is mentioning. Now let's address Tondro's criticism about characters fighting and looting deities. So this passage is from the foreword of the same book. It's not the entire foreword, but it's the part I want to highlight. It says, this volume is something else also. Our last attempt to reach the Monty Hall DMs. Now let me stop right there a minute. Some people, again, especially younger gamers, may not understand that reference. Monty Hall was the name of a game show host, and the show was called Let's Make a Deal. The term in Dungeons & Dragons is used to describe dungeon masters who are too generous in giving out treasure and experience points to their players. So again, this is our last attempt to reach the Monty Hall DMs. Perhaps now some of the giveaway campaigns will look as foolish as they truly are. This is our last attempt to delineate the absurdity of 40+ level characters. When Odin, the Allfather, has only 300 hit points, who can take a 44th level lord seriously? So in reality, here they are calling out dungeon masters who allow their players to become so powerful that they actually have a chance at defeating a deity. So this means that the answer to Tondro's question is no. The authors of this book did not intend for player characters to fight deities and loot their belongings. So just to drive home the point, this book is the successor to that original rule book, and this one was published in 1980. So therefore, it falls outside the scope of that new D&D Origins book. But the point I'm trying to make is still relevant. I've highlighted this particular comment written by Gygax. He says, thus, addition of these deities and demigods does not imbalance the campaign. Furthermore, characters who become a match for them are obviously to be ranked amongst their number, no longer suitable for daily campaign interaction, but to be removed to another place and plane and treated accordingly. So in so many words, what Gygax is saying is that any character that is actually powerful enough to challenge one of these deities should be removed from regular gameplay and moved into, the pantheon of that particular game. So to continue, this was written by the book's editor, Lawrence Schick. He says, talking about the book, open it up. Inside there are lots of pictures next to sets of stacked statistics. It must be just like the monster manual. There, that was easy. Now we know what it is. We know what to do with it, right? Wrong. So first he admits that this book looks a lot like the monster manual. However, he goes on to say that this book is not intended to be used like the monster manual. He says, deities and demigods may resemble the monster manual, and in fact does include some monsters. However, the purpose of this book is not to provide adversaries for player characters. So this is the final nail in the coffin. Clearly, the original authors of Dungeons & Dragons never intended for player characters to actually fight deities and loot their belongings. So as an aside, WotC's released a lot of artwork from the upcoming edition of D&D. I'm not going to go into that. Plenty of people already have. However, I do want to talk about this one particular picture. Specifically, the character in the wheelchair. No one that I know of has said this on any videos I've seen, but to me, I think the character in the wheelchair kind of looks like Stephen Hawking. But anyway, that's not the point. The whole thing about the adventure player characters in wheelchairs comes up a lot recently, but I just want to tell if you'll indulge me, I just want to tell a story. This would have been back in, I want to say, probably say the mid-90s. My brother ran an adventure for us, and during that adventure, our characters were escorting a big party of dwarves through this mountain pass, and they had, there were all the dwarves. They had these carts, I remember, of supplies of some kind. I don't remember the specifics, but it was the main thing is it was a large party of dwarves, and they had carts with them as well. So we're going through this mountain pass, and suddenly this big storm rolls in, and the wind's blowing and howling, and everyone had to make saving throws, I think, to avoid being swept off the mountain by the wind and falling to your doom down in the valley below. And some of the carts were blown over and wrecked. It was a big mess. So in the aftermath, when we were taking stock of all the damage, and we were healing our characters, and also some of these dwarven NPCs were hurt, and in particular, there was this one dwarf who was driving one of those carts, and it got flipped over, and he was trapped under the cart, and we got him out and healed him. But my brother said, all right, well, you've healed his wounds, but he was injured too badly, and he's paralyzed, and at least as of right now, he cannot walk. And in AD&D, which is what we were playing at the time, there are high-level spells. There's a high-level spell, Regenerate, which could potentially take care of that, but we were not high enough level to do that sort of thing. So we had this paralyzed dwarf. So what did we do? Well, we took the wreckage from that cart. We used the wood from it. We trimmed down the wheels, and basically we made a makeshift wheelchair for this paralyzed dwarf. And so for the whole rest of that adventure, we had this wheelchair-bound dwarf with us. So I just say all that to say that, it's a current topic in the game today, but all I would say is, we were doing this 30 years ago. So anyway, the point is there's nothing new under the sun. So back to the final clip of the video.
I'm not, I'm old, but I'm not that old. So I was about 10 when the Player's Handbook came out. So I didn't own the brown box or any of those original box, the white box, any of that stuff. I was about 10 when the local chess club at the junior high school announced they were having a Dungeons and Dragons club. And I didn't know what it was. I thought, well, it's the chess club. Maybe it's some kind of weird variant of chess, right? Like the castles or the dungeons, and I don't know. So I showed up at the chess club, and the older kids at the junior high had the white box. And I made my first character, which was Antele the Quiet. He was a monk. We were using rules from Eldritch Wizardry. And the monster manual was out, but not the Player's Handbook or the DM's Guide yet. And so I have a lot of fond memories of these early years of the game. And it felt like I was the right person to be making this,
All right, so Tondro says that he was put in charge of this Origins of D&D project because of his academic credentials and his personal history with the game. All right, fine. But did he or anyone else consult with those who were actually there? There's Rob Kuntz, of course, or how about Tim Kask? We've seen his name during the course of this video. He's still around, too. He even has a YouTube channel. Jim Ward, whose name we've also seen in this video, was still alive when this book was being compiled. Did anyone talk to him? I'm going to hazard a guess and say that the answer is no. So in short, the things that Tondro complains about regarding early Dungeons & Dragons seems to me to be a lot of pearl clutching over issues and even non-issues that no one even thought about back then. He says he was playing Dungeons & Dragons back in those days, so was his experiences different than mine? Either way, it didn't seem to bother him too much because he obviously didn't stop playing. In fact, he's just said he has fond memories of those days. The truth is, he is engaging in presentism, which is the judging of people in the past and their works through the lens of his own and WotC's present-day values. So in light of all this, I can certainly understand Rob Kuntz's anger here. Some of his criticism, you could say, is a little unfair. For example, the 50th anniversary of the Dungeons & Dragons game is when it is, independent of which creators are still around or not. However, I think that most of what he says is valid criticism, and I support him in it. And as for the people at WotC, I think they would do well to take a step back and reflect on this quote. We are like dwarves sitting on the shoulders of giants. We see more and things that are more distant than they did, not because our sight is superior or because we are taller than they, but because they raise us up and by their great stature add to ours. John of Salisbury, year 1159. Alright, well, that's all I have for now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, leave a comment, let me know what you think. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. Share the video if you can, and anything you can do to help support the channel, I appreciate it. Thanks again. Bye for now.
greatest adventure is what lies